Somewhere in Paris, there is a tower made of iron lace. That's what it looks like if you squint at it gently. Not like hard metal at all, but like something a patient hand drew very slowly across the sky. All those fine crisscrossing lines, all those careful little curves, rising up and up until the very tip seems to disappear into cloud or into pale evening light. You would think something that tall and that delicate couldn't possibly be real, couldn't have been built by people with their hands and their hammers. But it was. Every single piece of it was made and lifted and fastened into place by real people on a real riverbank a long time ago. And this is the story of how they did it. It begins in the city of Paris, which sits in the middle of France the way a comfortable cat sits in the middle of a rug. Settled and pleased with itself and surrounded by beautiful things. Paris has always been rather fond of being beautiful. It has wide, leafy streets and cafe tables outside in the sunshine and a river called the Seine that runs through the middle of everything in long, slow, greenish curves. In the year 1889, Paris was getting ready for a very big party. The party was called the World's Fair, or, if you wanted to say it the French way, which is always a little more elegant, the Exposition. Universelle. Countries from all over the world were invited to come and show off their finest things, their inventions, their art, their food, their ideas. It was the sort of grand, sweeping celebration that takes years to plan and weeks to clear up after, and Paris was tremendously excited about it. There was one more reason the party was especially important. The year 1889 was exactly 100 years since a great change had happened in France. A revolution. When the whole country had shifted and rearranged itself and decided to do things differently. "100 years is a very long time, and France wanted to mark the occasion with something memorable. Something permanent. Something that people would look at and say, yes. Something important happened here." What they settled on, after much debate and many ideas, was a tower. Not just any tower. A tower taller than anything that had ever been built in the world. A tower so tall that from the top of it you could see the whole city spread out below like a map someone had colored in very carefully. All the rooftops, and the river, and the little squares and the bridges. A tower that would make people stop and look and wonder. The question was, who was going to build it? The man who won that question was called Gustave Eiffel. Gustave Eiffel was an engineer, which means he spent his days thinking very hard about how things were built, how a bridge could hold its own weight and the weight of everything crossing it, how a structure could be strong without being heavy, how iron and steel could be shaped into something graceful. He had already built bridges across rivers in several countries, and he was very good at his work. He had a quiet, methodical kind of mind, the sort of mind that finds great satisfaction in a problem that has been solved perfectly. The tower was actually first sketched out by two of the engineers who worked for him, a man named Maurice Coquelin and another named Émile Nouguier. They drew it out one afternoon, a tall lattice of crisscrossing iron, a bit like a pylon but vastly, enormously grander. Eiffel looked at their drawing and saw something in it that he liked. An architect named Stephen Sylvestre made the design more beautiful, adding sweeping arches at the base and gentle curves where the legs met, so that the whole thing looked less like machinery and more like something that had grown there. And then Gustave Eiffel put his name on it, and it became the Eiffel Tower. And that is how things go sometimes. The construction was agreed. The tower would be built on the Champ de Mars, a wide open park beside the river Seine, and it would be ready in time for the World's Fair. Ready in time for the World's Fair meant building the tallest structure in the world in just 2 years and a bit. This was either a very confident plan or a slightly alarming one, depending on how you looked at it. Gustave Eiffel looked at it with great calm and began to plan. Before a single piece of iron was lifted, there was a year of drawing. Every part of the tower, every single beam and bracket and bolt was designed on paper first. Imagine trying to do that. Imagine sitting at a big drafting table with your careful pencils and your rulers, and drawing in exact measurements every one of the 18,000 pieces of iron that the tower would eventually need. Not roughly, not approximately, exactly. Each piece had to fit the ones next to it with a precision of 1/10 of a millimeter, which is about the width of a very fine hair. The drawings filled 5,300 separate sheets of paper. 5,300 sheets. If you stack them up, they would make quite a substantial pile. And every one of those sheets had to be checked, and checked again, because in a structure this tall, a piece that doesn't fit quite right doesn't just look untidy. It could mean the whole thing goes wrong. Eiffel's engineers were meticulous. That is a long word that means they were very, very careful about small things and proud of it. Only once the drawings were perfect did the making begin. Out in a factory not far from Paris, teams of workers began to produce the pieces. The iron arrived in long bars and sheets, and was cut and drilled and bent and shaped according to those thousands of careful drawings. It was a bit like making the world's most complicated jigsaw puzzle, except that each piece weighed anywhere from a few kilograms to several tons. And if you got one wrong, you couldn't simply tip the box and start over. The workers drilled the holes for the rivets in the factory. Rivets are a very old and very satisfying kind of fastening. A thick pin of metal, heated until it glows red, pushed through 2 layers of iron and then hammered flat on the other end so it holds the 2 pieces together permanently. On the Eiffel Tower, there would be 2.5 million of them. 2.5 million. If you counted 1 rivet every second without stopping, it would take you nearly a month to reach that number. The pieces came off the factory floor and were loaded onto carts, and the carts made their way through the streets of Paris to the Champ de Mars, where the wide, flat park was beginning to fill with scaffolding and machinery and the quiet industry of preparation. It is pleasant to imagine those carts making their slow way through the city, heavy loads of carefully labeled iron, wrapped and stacked, the horses patient and plodding, the drivers perhaps stopping now and then to let a flock of pigeons clear the road, or to nod to someone they knew. Paris, going about its business on either side, unaware that the pieces of something extraordinary were passing by. The foundations came first. Before any iron was lifted into the air, the ground had to be prepared to hold it. The Eiffel Tower has 4 legs, and those legs had to be set into the earth at exactly the right places. Not roughly in the right places, not close enough, but precisely right, because the whole geometry of the tower depended on those 4 points being exactly where they were supposed to be. The ground near the river Seine was soft and wet in some places, and great care was taken with the foundations on the riverside legs. Huge cylindrical chambers were sunk down through the earth, and workers operated air-pumped chambers to keep the river water from flooding in while the foundations were built up from concrete and stone. It was slow, careful work, and it was done properly. Each of the 4 legs was set to point directly toward one of the 4 compass directions: north, south, east, and west. If you stand at the base of the tower today and look up along one of the legs, you are looking in a perfectly cardinal direction. There is something quietly satisfying about that. The idea that this enormous structure is oriented by the whole planet, anchored not just to the ground beneath it, but to the turning of the earth itself. By the spring of 1887, the foundations were in place, and the iron could begin to rise. The 4 legs started to grow. Each leg came up on its own, at first leaning very gently inward at the angle that the engineers had calculated. The iron pieces were bolted together section by section, and with every new section, the legs grew taller. It was intricate, patient work, like building 4 great staircases that all leaned toward each other and would eventually meet in the middle, far above the ground. To make sure the legs were rising at exactly the right angles, enormous hydraulic jacks were used. These were machines that could push or pull with tremendous measured force making tiny adjustments. A fraction of a degree here, a small correction there. So that when the four legs finally converged at what would become the first floor of the tower, they would fit together perfectly. And they did. The iron pieces slotted into place with remarkable accuracy, a testament to all those months of careful drawing and careful making. The first floor platform was assembled at about 57 meters above the ground. That is already very high. Taller than many church steeples, taller than a 15 or 16-story building. From up there, the workers could look out over all of Paris, and Paris looked very small and very quiet and very flat. Then the second floor at 115 meters. Then the tower narrowed and continued upward. Then the top. The whole thing. From the day the foundations began to the day the last piece of iron was fastened into place, took just 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days. In the world of building enormous things, that is very fast indeed. It was fast because the pieces had been made in the factory ahead of time, and because the whole process had been planned with such completeness that when a piece arrived on the cart, the workers knew exactly where it went. The workers themselves deserve a quiet moment of attention. There were around 300 of them on the site at any given time. Not so very many for such a very big task. They were skilled men, experienced with heights and iron and the particular demands of working far above the ground. As the tower grew taller, their workplace grew correspondingly more vertiginous, which is a lovely word that means dizzyingly high. The rivet setters worked in teams of 4. One man heated the rivet in a small portable furnace until it glowed a bright orange red. Then he grabbed it with tongs and threw it. Yes, threw it through the air to a second man waiting nearby who caught it in a cone-shaped metal bucket. The catcher would then pick up the hot rivet with tongs and insert it through the waiting holes in the iron. A third man would press a heavy tool against one end to hold it in place, and the fourth man would hammer the other end flat quickly, while the iron was still hot enough to spread. Tap, 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 tap. The whole tower must have rung with that sound during the 2 years of its building. A constant rhythmic tapping, high in the air above the Seine, above the park, above the rooftops of Paris. The sound of 2.5 million small decisions being made permanent. Can you imagine standing on the street below and hearing that? Looking up at these small figures moving around among the iron lace far above, their hammers making that soft, persistent music. And knowing that what they were making, piece by piece and tap by tap, was something the world had never seen before. Not everyone was pleased about it. This is perhaps not surprising. New and very large things have a habit of making some people uncomfortable, especially when those new large things are going up in the middle of a beloved city. As the tower rose higher and higher above the Paris skyline, a number of artists and writers and architects wrote a letter of protest, calling it, among other things, a useless and monstrous iron column. They called it a blight on the beauty of Paris. One writer referred to it as a factory chimney in the making. Gustave Eiffel was polite about this. He said that he believed the tower had its own beauty, that the beauty of engineering was real beauty, not a different or lesser kind. He thought the curved shape of the four legs, the way the whole structure tapered upward, had a grace that would come to be appreciated. He was, as it turned out, right. But at the time, he said it all very quietly and kept building. Isn't it funny how often the things that people first said were ugly turn out to be loved? The Eiffel Tower is now one of the most visited and most painted and most photographed things in the world. People travel from every country on Earth to stand beneath it and look up and feel something, a particular kind of feeling that comes from being near something very large that was made by human hands. The tower was finished in March of 1889, and the World's Fair opened in May. Gustave Eiffel himself walked up the 1,710 steps to the very top and planted a French flag there, which must have been a satisfying moment, even if his legs were rather tired afterward. Visitors came in their thousands. The tower had elevators, which were themselves a marvel of engineering. 4 of them in the legs, running on hydraulic power, lifting people smoothly upward. There were restaurants on the 1st and 2nd floors. There was an observation area at the top, where you could look out over Paris in every direction and, on a clear day, see for miles and miles. People who had never been above the 2nd story of any building in their lives suddenly found themselves looking down at cathedral towers they had always looked up at. The city, seen from up there, had a different quality. Peaceful and miniature, and somehow more comprehensible, like a city seen in a dream. The whole of it laid out, the river making its long bends, the roads running outward from the center like spokes from a wheel. The tower received nearly 2 million visitors in its first year. 2 million people climbed those stairs or rode those elevators and looked out over Paris and felt something they couldn't quite put into words. That is what a very good piece of engineering can do. It doesn't just stand there. It changes how you see things. Now, here is a detail worth lingering on. The Eiffel Tower was always meant to be temporary. That is the strange and slightly wonderful fact about it. When it was built, the agreement was that it would stand for 20 years And then, in 1909, it would be taken down. It was always intended as a demonstration, a proof of what iron and engineering could do, not a permanent monument. The artists who had complained about it must have been quietly pleased about this arrangement. But the tower was not taken down in 1909. What saved it was radio. In those 20 years, people had discovered that the tall iron structure was extraordinarily useful as an antenna. Wireless telegraphy. The sending of messages through the air without any wires was becoming enormously important, and the tower's great height made it the finest radio transmitter in France. By 1909, it was relaying military communications. By the First World War, it was intercepting enemy signals. It had become, quietly and practically, part of the way the country worked. And so, the decision to demolish it was simply set aside, and then forgotten. And then the 20-year deadline passed, and the tower stayed, and nobody really made a fuss about it after that. The tower that was built to be temporary became permanent through sheer usefulness. There is something quietly amusing about that. All that drama and complaint and protest, and in the end, what saved the tower wasn't art or sentiment or national pride, but the need for a good radio mast. The tower has been painted over and over again since then. Every 7 years, a team of painters covers the whole structure, every beam and every rivet and every curve, with roughly 60 tons of paint. That is a great deal of paint. The painting always starts from the top and works its way down, which makes sense if you think about it, because if you started from the bottom, you would spend a great deal of time repainting the drips. The color of the tower has changed over the years. It has been reddish-brown and ochre, yellow, and various shades of brown and gray. Since 1968, it has been painted a warm brownish color called Eiffel Tower brown, which is a rather pleased with itself name for a color. There are 3 different shades of it used on the tower: darker at the bottom, lighter at the top, which makes the structure look more uniform when seen from the ground, because the sky is a pale backdrop for the top, and the ground is a darker backdrop for the base. Isn't that a thoughtful detail? The people who paint it take the sky into account. And here is another thing the tower does that is easy to miss. It moves. Not dramatically, not in a way you would notice from the street. But the iron of the tower expands when it is warm and contracts when it is cool, the way iron does. On a hot summer day, the top of the tower can be as much as 15 centimeters higher than it is on a cold winter morning. 15 centimeters. The tower breathes with the seasons, very slowly, in and out, warm and cool. In a strong wind, it sways. only about 6 or 7 centimeters at the top, which sounds small, but when you are standing at the top and you feel it very gently, it is a remarkable sensation. The tower flexing almost imperceptibly in the wind that comes across the Seine. All those millions of rivets holding firm while the whole enormous structure shifts, barely, like a very tall tree. Something that looks so rigid, bending gently in the weather. If you were to look very closely at the 4 great arches at the base of the tower, those sweeping curves between the feet of the legs, you might notice something else. Running along the edge of the first floor, engraved in the iron, are 72 names. Gustave Eiffel had the names of 72 French scientists, engineers, and mathematicians inscribed on the tower, one for each of the great minds of science that had made such a structure possible. People who had worked out the mathematics of iron and heat and force, who had discovered the principles that underlie the whole elegant structure. They are there in the iron, permanently, those 72 names, going quietly around the tower just above the first floor. The names were painted over at some point and became invisible for a while. But in the 1980s, they were uncovered again and restored. Now they are readable once more, if you walk around the base and look up. Imagine having your name on the Eiffel Tower, in iron, for as long as the tower stands. Today the tower has small lights, thousands of them, that sparkle at night for a few minutes every hour after dark. It is not an old thing, this sparkling. It was added in 1985, just 40 years ago. But it has become part of what the tower is. People plan their evenings in Paris to be standing somewhere with a view when the clock turns and the lights begin. It must look, from a distance, a bit like something living. A tall, warm presence in the dark city, briefly alive with light, and then returning to its quiet self. And that is the tower now. Standing where it has always stood, on the Champ de Mars, beside the slow green Seine, swaying its 6 or 7 centimeters in the wind, expanding in summer, contracting in winter, being painted every 7 years by patient people who start at the top, carrying 72 names in its iron. The tower that was built in 2 years and meant to last 20 has been standing for nearly 140. Gustave Eiffel, the man whose name the tower carries, was a thoughtful and somewhat private person. He had a small apartment built at the very top of the tower, just below the observation deck. It was a simple room, with a piano and a few chairs, and he would go up there to think and to meet other thoughtful people. Thomas Edison, the American inventor, came to visit him there once, and they sat together very high above Paris and talked about the future. Eiffel lived to be 91 years old, and he spent much of his later life studying the air, how wind moved, how resistance worked, because his tower had given him a perfect place to run such experiments. He built a wind tunnel at the base of the tower and conducted research into aerodynamics, which is the science of how things move through air. He did this quietly, without great fanfare, into his 80s. He died in 1923, which means he had many years to watch the world come around to his tower. To see the artists who had called it monstrous eventually paint it and photograph it and decide that Paris would be inconceivable without it. He must have felt, privately, rather satisfied. The tower stands there still, this evening in Paris. The Seine is making its quiet way underneath the bridges, the way it always has. The Champ de Mars is wide and green, the way it always has been, with people walking their dogs and sitting on the grass and looking up at the iron lace overhead. It is made of 18,000 pieces, each one planned on paper before it was made in a factory, loaded on a cart, carried through the city, lifted into place, and fastened with rivets tapped in by teams of 4. $2.5 million rivets, 5,300 sheets of drawings, 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days of work. And here it is. Tall and quiet and still, swaying just a little in whatever wind is passing tonight, the lights coming on in a few minutes to sparkle for the city. And all those 72 names going slowly around the first floor in the dark, in the iron, as they have been for nearly 140 years. There is something about a thing made with great patience and great care that lasts. The drawings were careful. The measurements were careful. The iron was made well, and the holes drilled true, and the rivets set firm. 2.5 million firm, small decisions. And so it stands. And you can imagine it there now, if you like, in the dark above Paris. The lights sparkling for a moment and then going still. The iron warm from the day and slowly cooling as the night settles in. The river below running its long, slow way through the city. A little sway in the wind, barely perceptible. Barely there. Steady. Quiet. Still.